Hello and welcome to the Agriculture Innovation Center program webinar for applicants. As we get started here, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items so that everyone's comfortable with the Zoom platform we're using today. And if we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So first of all, I'd like to go over the functionality. The toolbar for Zoom is located at the bottom of your screen. And the first button that we have available here is the mute button. Attendees for this meeting are in listen-only mode and will not be unmuted unless by the host. The second functionality that we have here today is the raised, or the third first thing we have is for the raised hands, the chat functionality. Attachment and messages from the panelists will show here. This is where we will be able to provide information to our participants. The third option is the raise hand functions. We will not be using this feature, so we would like everyone to submit all questions through the Q&A option, and that is the next option for us. The Q&A button, please submit all your questions to the presenters and the panelists here using the Q&A button. And finally, the last button available is the leave button. Today's webinar is being recorded. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Kamar Neal.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that, Maggie, and appreciate you all for being here. Thank you so much for your attendance. We are so pleased that you are interested in the Agricultural Innovation Center program and in helping agricultural producers develop and market value-added agricultural products. AIC, the Agriculture Innovation Center program, is part of a suite of programs that support just that effort, the development and marketing of value-added products. Specifically, AIC works with the Value Added Producer Grant Program and the Agricultural Marketing Resource Center. VAPG, the Value Added Producer Grant Program, awards funds directly to agricultural producers for planning and working capital activities, while the Resource Center publishes information related to value-added agriculture. This program, AIC, provides funding to centers who can work with agricultural producers on developing and marketing their products. The AIC program has been available for some time, so we're particularly excited that activity and interest has increased in recent years. AIC has very specific eligibility and application requirements, and we hope that this webinar will help explain the program requirements to help you determine if you would like to apply, and if so, how to do that. So with that, I'll turn things over now to Gail Toner, who manages the program. She's going to give you some more details about the program and how you can apply. So Gail, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm going to get my video here. Hi, everybody. My name is Gail Tuner, and I'm the current program manager for the AIC program. I apologize about my camera. It unfortunately is slowly losing its will to live. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of a glimpse of me so you can match my face to my name. And then I'm going to go ahead and stop that so it's not so distracting. But today, we're going to go through the AIC program, and you'll be able to find my contact information at the end of the presentation in case you have follow-up questions. And Honey Turner is also a contact for the program. Her information is at the end of the presentation too. I've got our agenda up on the screen now so you can see how we'll proceed today. First, I'll give you an overview of the program, including some background on how the program started. Once we've covered those basics, I'll talk about what the eligibility requirements are for the program and go through what you need for an application. Then I'll explain how we process applications and make awards. Finally, I will open up the webinar for your questions. I'm expecting to take about 45 to 60 minutes to go through the information that I'd like to present, and then the rest of the time period will be for questions. So let's see if we can get to the next slide. All right, here we go. So let's talk about the program in general. I'm going to go through a little bit of a background on the program and then explain what the main purpose of the program is. So the program was actually first authorized in the 2002 Farm Bill. It was set up to provide grants to agriculture innovation centers that would work with agricultural producers to help them develop and market value-added agricultural products. We didn't have the resources to run the program back in 2002, but we did in 2003. So we made 10 awards for about $10 million. After 2003, though, the program lost its funding until 2018. By then, the program had been dormant for so long that we had some legal and policy questions to tackle. Once we resolved those questions, we opened the application period for the program. We've had 2 previous rounds of funding, making 6 awards. Through those previous rounds, we've learned a lot about the challenges of this program and the kinds of questions that our applicants have. So we did make a few adjustments to the language in our Federal Register notice to help answer those questions and provide some clarity on a few issues that have come up. Hopefully this webinar will provide some useful information to help you decide if you want to apply for a grant during the current application period, which closes on March 6th. So the way the funds can be used for this program has caused some confusion, and I'll go through the use of funds more specifically later in the presentation. But for now, just remember that the centers need to provide services directly to agricultural producers to help them develop and market a value-added agricultural product. The program also has some important thresholds to be aware of. There is a minimum of $600,000 on the awards, and the statute sets a maximum of $1 million. The grant award can cover up to 2/3 of project costs. Remember that project costs include both federal and matching funds. So what the threshold means is that the grant can pay for 2/3 of the project, and matching funds must cover the other third. So if a recipient gets a $1 million grant, they would have to provide $500,000 in matching funds. We have also increased the period of performance to 3 years because our experience has been that new centers need a significant amount of time to get up and running, and existing centers appreciate having the time to take producers from the start of an idea to marketing a product without an interruption in funding. Now that we have a general idea of what the program does, let's talk about what the eligibility requirements are. In terms of what types of organizations are eligible for the program, basically all types are eligible. The only restriction that we have is that individuals can't apply. Note that commercial organizations are the same as for-profit corporations. We've updated our terminology to match the federal regulation that governs the administrative requirements for grants. So you can see nonprofits, for-profits, institutions of higher education, state governments, local governments, and federally recognized Indian tribes are all eligible to apply. The AIC program does have a matching funds requirement, which I just talked about a minute ago, but I wanted to just review this a little bit more with you. The matching funds requirement is for 1/3 of the project's cost. So remember that the project cost is the sum of the grant funds and matching funds. So I've got an example here that if you want to request a $1 million grant award, you would need to provide at least $500,000 in matching funds. Those matching funds can come from a variety of sources, including the applicant's cash reserves and third parties. One important consideration when you are looking at using matching funds from a third party is how the funds can be used. For example, if you are planning to use a state grant as match, you need to make sure that the grant can be used for allowable purposes for the AIC program. Another consideration is making sure that if the funds are in-kind services from a third party, that you have a good method of valuing those services. And I do want to add one other note about something that has happened. A lot of times, I think this happens particularly with universities. They will think that if the university is paying the salaries for one or more of the staff working on the project, that is an in-kind match. And in fact, we consider that cash from the applicant. So it needs to be verified that way. It isn't considered in kind because there is payment from the organization for the staff. So I just wanted to clarify that because that has come up.
Gail, can I just interject real quick? We're kind of losing in and out on your mic. If you could try to get a little closer with your mic, because it comes through good and then it kind of fades out.
Sure, I will try to do a little bit better. Does that sound better?
That does sound better. Thank you.
All righty, thank you so much. All right, so then the next thing we want to talk about are the requirements for the center's governance. This thing I think is pretty challenging for a lot of applicants to meet. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about it. The first thing is that the center needs to have independent governance. What does that mean? Well, the center can be a subsidiary or some other kind of subordinate organization, but the center needs to have a separate board of directors, control over personnel decisions, including hiring and firing employees and contractors, the ability to set policies and procedures, including personnel and procurement, and the ability to develop and approve its budget and select its own board of directors. So that is something that a lot of organizations struggle with, and I want to make sure that that's clear there. The next thing I want to go over is the actual board of directors, because the center needs to have a board of directors. And it needs to have a board of directors that have representatives from very specific organizations. So the general agricultural organization with the most members in your state, the general agricultural organization with the second most members in your state, and the State Department of Agriculture or a state legislator, and finally representatives from 4 different agricultural commodity organizations. So how do you figure out who these representatives are? For the for the general agricultural organization with the most members in your state, it's most likely the Farm Bureau. And then for the second most members, that can often take a little bit more time to figure out. Your Farm Bureau may know, your State Department of Agriculture may know. If you have a university with a strong ag program, they may know. And the other thing is Google. So you're just looking to see how many members these organizations have and how that relates to other organizations in your state. Then something else that I really want to make people aware of is for the representative from the State Department of Agriculture or the state legislator, there are occasionally conflict of interest issues that come up with these representatives. So sometimes the State Department of Agriculture will consider it a conflict of interest to have a representative on your board. And sometimes a state legislator may have a conflict of interest because of the committee that they work on or because of legislation that they are sponsoring. So it's really important to check in with the department or your state legislator and have them confirm that they can be a representative. The State Department of Agriculture will usually be able to make its own determination. For a state legislator, they often need to consult with an ethics committee or legal counsel for their governing body. So just be aware that that may be an issue. And then finally, the representatives from the different commodity organizations should be a little bit easier. These organizations should represent agricultural commodities, not end products. And good types of organizations to look for are ones that represent producers or growers, and state marketing boards, if your state has them, might be a good option too. So another eligibility requirement that can be hard to meet, especially for organizations that are new to providing assistance to ag producers, is being able to show existing capability to provide services. Either the applicant organization must have the experience to provide the services, or there needs to be at least 2 key personnel that have that experience. And it's important to remember that the experience must be the same type of experience as what you are proposing in your application. So if you want to provide financial services and organizational services, either your organization or your key personnel must have at least 3 years of experience providing those types of services to ag producers. So the next requirement that I want to show you is that your project needs to have the support of the agricultural community. The way we determine that is to look at 3 letters of support. The organizations that are providing the support need to have a primary mission of supporting agriculture. They need to be based in the state or region that your project will serve. And they need to serve the same group of producers that are targeted by your project. What we have found in the past is there's been some confusion about where this support should come from. And we have seen some letters coming in from general economic development organizations. So it's important that you consider the organizations that are going to be providing the support. It should be clear either from the name of the organization or in the body of the letter that the organization supports agriculture. There should also be enough information in the letter so that we can figure out where the organization is based and what kind of producers they work with. For example, it wouldn't make sense for you to get support from an organization that works with hemp producers if you aren't planning on doing any work with hemp producers. Instead, you want support from organizations that have a connection to your project. The next thing to remember is that your project needs to have a clear focus on helping agricultural producers develop and market value-added agricultural products. So that means being clear in your application and providing descriptions of services that use words like agricultural producers and value-added. A problem that several applicants have had in the past is that they were too general in the description of their services. So they were describing general business development services, but didn't indicate any focus on value added. Or they weren't clear that they would be working with ag producers. You need to remember that while general services can be very helpful, an Ag Innovation Center's job is to focus specifically on working with ag producers to develop and market value added products. So all the services that are provided need to be provided with that goal in mind, even if it could turn out that a producer opts not to market a product after receiving the service. Centers can provide the list of services on the slide that you see now, but they can't provide any services to other types of entities like distributors, processors, or consumers. One other thing that I want to highlight is that the mini grants that are listed here need to be provided for the same types of services that the center can provide, and the matching funds requirement carries through. So that means if a producer is getting a $5,000 mini grant, they need to provide at least $2,500 in matching funds. And the center needs to go through the same process to make these awards that a federal agency would. That means a public notice requesting applications as well as a merit review process. And then the awards need to be monitored just like a federal award, including all of the paperwork and reporting. So I don't say that to discourage organizations from considering the mini grants, but just to be aware that there is an extra burden associated with them. But the business development services, marketing development services, financial advisory services, process development services, organizational assistance, value chain coordination, product development, with the exception of recipe development, and establishing and operating the center are all sort of standard type services that you can provide. Alrighty, so now that we've covered what you can do, let's talk about a few things that you can't do. There's a whole list in the Federal Register notice that goes through the funding restrictions, but I want to highlight a few that have caused problems for applicants in the past. In particular, I want to note that production expenses and processing expenses are not allowable. And as an extension of those restrictions, I want to point out that centers cannot use this grant to support their own profit-making operation. So if your organization processes or manufactures value-added products, you can't use this award to help your organization do those activities. Instead, the centers must provide the services to agricultural producers rather than using the award for their own benefit. And I know that's something that has caused some confusion, so I just want to make sure I highlight that. But also note that some other commonly confused items are construction, equipment, vehicles, lobbying, purchasing real property, research and development, and then anything involving a conflict of interest. So just be aware of that as you're putting together your proposed work plans and budgets. And then I want to remind you of a few more restrictions. You need to make sure your funding request falls within the minimum and the maximum award amount, which means you need to request at least $600,000, but not more than $1 million. If you request less or more than those amounts, we can't process your application. Your center also needs to propose providing assistance to more than one producer. You can't set yourself up to just basically funnel the award to another organization. You need to really set yourself up as a technical assistance and service provider. Because the goal of the program is to have centers providing services to lots of producers. And then the center can't earn revenue from processing or selling the product that is developed and marketed. That revenue needs to stay with the agricultural producer and that particular supply chain. However, that doesn't preclude you from charging fees for your services if that's a model that you choose to use. And then I did want to remind you again that you cannot provide services to entities other than agricultural producers. Although as part of your value chain coordination efforts, you can connect producers to distributors or other service providers as part of that process. And the final thing I want to flag here on this slide is that if your budget includes more than 10% of funds that are allocated for unallowable costs, which are the restricted costs that we've been talking about, we will consider your application ineligible for assistance. And we do try and give you a little bit of wiggle room. But if your budget is more than 10% of unallowable costs, you run into issues with scoring it as well as with the viability of the project. So that's kind of where we came up with that 10% amount. All right, and there's a few more things here that I want to cover on this slide before we move on. We do have a period of performance for centers that is 3 years. In the past, it's been 2 years, and we found that that just wasn't quite enough. And so we've extended it to 3 years. And that means that your project is active for 3 years. So you can start incurring costs and keep incurring them for 3 years. And I really encourage anyone who applies to take full advantage of that time frame. You can always wrap up your project in less time, but we have found, especially if you're a new center, you really do need time to get up and running and hire staff and do your outreach and kind of get your producers coming in through the door. So you do need that time. And then another thing to think about is that the objective of the program is to create sustainable centers that can provide continuous services. So we're really looking for organizations that can start up to provide these services and then continue to provide them over a long period of time, rather than providing support for a one-time effort. So then moving on, if you've had other federal awards, we will check to make sure you've had satisfactory performance on those awards. And that means things like submitting reports on time, performing according to the approved scope of work, and using funds for allowable purposes. We will also assess your financial capability by looking at your current ratio and cash on hand. Your application needs to be complete. If you're missing something, we won't be able to come back to you and ask for it. You also can't duplicate services that you are currently providing. That doesn't mean you can't continue to offer services that you have experience providing. Instead, it means that you need to make sure those services are provided to new clients or you develop or you bring in existing clients but offer new services to them. So, and then finally, see, we got a couple more here. Your organization is limited to submitting only one application, please. And if you are expecting to contract with another center that you know is already applying for the program or is already funded, that you limit your contract to 10% or less of your total budget. And that is so we can keep our centers kind of independent. We want to encourage you to collaborate, but we also want to make sure that each award is going to essentially one center. So that's the reason for that restriction. All right, so now that we've covered the eligibility requirements, let's talk about what you need for your application. It's important to remember that the information in your application accomplishes two things. First, it gives us the information we need to assess your eligibility, which I just talked about. And second, it gives us the information we need to assess the merit of your application relative to what other applications are proposing to do. So this is the scoring part of the process. So here I'm going to go through the requirements, and I'm also going to try and show you where you can find them. So bear with me as I move around a little bit. The first thing to know is where you can find the application requirements. And the best place to find those is in our Federal Register notice that we published on December 5th, 2022 in section D2. So let's talk about how you can find that. So I'm going to move out of my presentation here for a minute. And I'm going to go ahead and go to, this is the Federal Register website. And if you want to pull up our Federal Register notice, let's say you haven't bookmarked it or you haven't had a chance to read it yet and you'd like to, you can go to the search function and type in the name of the program. And the first document that pops up should be the notice inviting applications for Agriculture Innovation Demonstration Center grants. And you'll see down here towards the bottom of the right, there's a PDF printed version. Go ahead and click on that. This is the official application notice. It's got all the eligibility information in it that we just went over. It's got all the application requirements in it. This is it. We don't have other special stuff. I promise you everything is in here. So to go through and find where the application information is, we're going to scroll through until we get here. You can see application submission information. And then we're going to go to the next page, item 2, content and form of application submission. So this is where we start going through all the things you need. I'm going to cover that in today's presentation as well. But I just wanted to show you how you can find it. Now, there's more than one place to find it because we're the federal government and we like to make sure that people have different ways of accessing it. So now we are going to go to grants.gov. And grants.gov is where our official funding opportunity announcement is published. And so here you can find it by entering the opportunity number. You can also search the name of the program. I just happen to know the opportunity number, RBCS-AIC-2023. So we're going to go ahead and you'll see here, we get our opportunity number here. We're going to click on that. And this pulls up the opportunity itself, which has a synopsis, which kind of gives you some of that basic information I went through at the beginning. And then you're going to see this related documents tab. This is super important. This is where, if you scroll down here, you're going to see where my cursor is highlighted and hopefully red for you is the Federal Register notice. That's the same PDF file I just pulled up. Then it's also got some supporting documents here, which we'll go through in a minute, the checklist and the template. And let's see here. We are also going to go one more place, and that is the Agriculture Innovation Center program page that Rural Development hosts. And this again is just a kind of gives you an overview of the program. And then it's also got this button here in the middle of the page, which says Federal Register Notice. If you click on that, you will get a copy of the PDF again. So that's 3 different ways you can access the requirements. I also want to show you that we have under the To Apply tab here on the website, towards the bottom, we have application template. If you click on that, you will get the template document that we have, which can give you a lot of guidance for submitting your application. It's not required, but it's super helpful. And then we have a checklist to help you make sure you're getting all of the items that you need. But you can also find those 2 documents back over in the grants.gov listing. You'll see them here and here. Okay, so I want to make sure that you know how to find that information. So now that we've done that, let's see. Oh, I'm going to pull up. You'll humor me for a minute. I'm just going to show you something here in the application template. Hopefully that'll come up for me. Okay, this is not the template. All right, here we go. So here's the template, and it's got a lot of instructions to click to enter names and information, and it's got this handy table of contents. And I wanted to show you that if you click on that, there's a little option here to update table. And you can click, so if you end up having to change any of the headers in the document, or if you just need to update your page numbers, you can click, you toggle either one of those 2 options and click OK, and it will update the entire table of contents, making your document super searchable and easy to use, and make sure that the page numbers match the headers, which really helps us when we're looking for information. So I just wanted to make sure you had seen that. All right, so let's go through some of these requirements, and I'll probably toggle back and forth between the presentation and the kind of the template here, if I can figure out how to do that. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. So I'm going to go over what most people would consider like the bulk of like a proposal. If you're used to doing a request for proposal type project, you're going to have a table of contents, executive summary, goals, work plan, budget justification, and scoring criteria. And this is the information that our reviewers see. So we've got it grouped together in the template, so we can just pull that out and give it to our reviewers for their review. And we'll talk about the eligibility stuff here in a minute. But I wanted to give you just a little bit more information. One of the things I want to encourage you to do is the work plan and budget. And I want to encourage you to provide a lot of good information. The details that you provide can help us make good judgments on whether your project is a good fit for the program. And if we can't figure something out, a lot of times we might have to determine your application ineligible. But if you provide us lots of good details, then we can tell what you want to do and make sure that we're making the correct decision. And it's especially important when it comes to how you're using your budget. If you have a cost in your budget that we're not sure about, but you have a really clear description of it and a good amount, we can tell and we say, you know what, this cost is not allowable, but we can see it's only a few $1,000s out of a $1.5 million project. So we know this isn't a big deal. We're going to go ahead and let the application go through and just ask you to remove those unallowable costs if you get an award. If we can't tell, then we might say, well, what if this is a big part of the project and we let it go through and then they can't do the project without this money? So that detail there in your work plan and budget is super helpful. And then I do want to go over the scoring criteria just a little bit. You'll see a really good breakdown of what we're looking for in the Federal Register notice, which I just showed you. And then the template also has pretty good kind of fill in the section, and I'll go there in just a minute. But I want you to know we are looking for a pretty good level of detail here. Remember that these are large projects of up to $1.5 million. So we are expecting a sophisticated level of writing and a good sense of what you expect to accomplish with your project. So let me move out of here and see if I can go ahead and let's see, here's our template. So you can see as I'm scrolling through here that one thing I am going to draw your attention to, I think maybe I mentioned it later, but instead of listing your producer services, we've just got checkboxes for you to help you out. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, why we do that in a bit. But here's the scoring criteria. And you can see that most of the criteria has more than one component to it. So we've broken that out for you so you can kind of answer that component in each section to make it clearer. So I just want to make sure you're aware of that. Even if you choose not to use the template, you can adopt that format in whatever document you decide to submit. And so like for successful track record, we have a chart for you to fill out, which can be really helpful. For the work plan and budget, we have a place where you can write your overview, which kind of tells us generally what you want to do. And then we have each of the different allowable activities has its own page here. And you can, if you're not doing the activity, you can take it out. But if you are, it kind of helps guide you through the information that we would like to see. So a description, who are the key personnel? What is the expected time frame? Things like that. So anyway, I encourage you to take a look at the template and make sure you understand what you are supposed to be providing. All right, so now once we've gone past that sort of the meat of the application, we get into some of these standard forms and certifications and eligibility requirements. So we've got some listed here. You'll see the SF 424 and the SF 424A on grants.gov as part of the application package. The certification for federal judgments and lobbying is included in part of the template. So you can fill it out there or you can, copy and paste it. We're also looking for your audit. I know some of you will have publicly available audits and you're tempted to just give us a link to those audits. Please don't. What we have found is sometimes your financial office takes down your financial reports or your audits for whatever reason. Maybe they're reconfiguring the website. Maybe they have to make an update and then we can't access it. And so if we can't access it, then it's like you didn't submit it. So it's a much safer thing to do to just submit the whole audit, even if it's big and has a lot of file space. That way you know for sure we're able to access it. Let's see. The applicant eligibility section is another thing that has caused people problems. In the Federal Register notice, we give you information on how to sort of explain your eligibility based on the type of organization you are. And so please follow those instructions. Usually we ask for a document or a legal citation. And even if you're a Department of Agriculture or you're Harvard University, I know that name probably means a lot, but we still need to have that citation for our legal review to show that you are in fact eligible to receive funds. So just be aware of that. All right, next up, we have verification of matching funds. And I'm going to go ahead and swap back over to the template because I want to show you that there is a template within the template, I guess. So we're going to just kind of move through the document here. And we are going to scroll down to where we have some of the eligibility stuff, you can see that we have some placeholder pages for you and checkboxes and things like that. One thing I want to highlight is the verification of matching funds. We do have a form right within the template you can use to fill out. And if you as an organization are the only one that's providing match to the project, this is all you need. However, if you have funds that are being provided by a third party, you need to have another letter from every third party that's providing match for you that identifies the amount, the use of funds, and the time period of availability. You can either plug it into the template or you can attach it as a separate document, but that's really important to have. All right, so now we're going to go back to the presentation. And before, when I was talking about eligibility, I went through the governance of the center, the board of directors requirements. Make sure that you are being super diligent when you are filling out these sections. For example, if you tell us that your board of directors is advisory, you're not going to be eligible. A board of directors is a true governing body. And so it's awesome if you have advisory members and you can have them, but you need to have a true board of directors with the required members. And we'll ask you to provide documentation, rather a letter of commitment from the representatives who are going to be on your board of directors with your application to show that you are meeting that requirement. So just be aware of that. You need to describe your capability to provide services. You need to include the 3 letters of support from the agricultural community, and you need to describe your coordination and alliances. This coordination and alliances requirement is often not taken very seriously, but it is a statutory requirement, which is why it's there. And so we are asking that you do think through how you're coordinating your project, which organizations you're going to be working with, and if you have relationships that you want to set up or that you have set up, that you describe them in this section. All right, so now let's talk about what happens after you submit your application. So you're going to submit your application through grants.gov. We can't accept your application through email or FedEx or UPS or anything like that. It needs to be through grants.gov. And the system should give you an automated acknowledgement when you do that. However, we may not have seen it at that point. Once you submit it through grants.gov, then grants.gov needs to basically electronically send it to the agency. And so we need to go retrieve it. And after we have retrieved it, we will issue an email acknowledging receipt to you. And we'll use the contact information that you put on your SF-424 form. So given that the deadline is March 6th, I would say you should expect to hear from us within 2, maybe 3 weeks of the deadline. So probably mid to late March. If you don't hear from us by the end of March, certainly you're welcome to check in and make sure that we've gotten your application. Okay, and so one thing I do want to mention here is that if you are having trouble submitting your application through grants.gov, you need to connect with grants.gov customer service. We don't have any control over the system, and we actually can't see anything until your application has actually been submitted. So we can't tell what problems you're having. Occasionally I'm able to troubleshoot with you, but most of the time grants.gov is going to provide a lot better service, and they know the technical requirements of their system. I can give you some tips for some things in the past that seem like they hung people up a little bit. Make sure that you have your SAM.gov registration up to date with your unique entity identifier, which used to be called the DUNS number. That can sometimes take some time to do. So once you've got that registration current, you make sure you have an account set up in grants.gov. Make sure you set up a workspace and make sure you have an authorized representative for your organization and that that person knows who they are and that they are where they need to submit your application. So one other thing that comes up a lot is how do you submit attachments? So when you go into grants.gov to apply, you will be able to fill out the SF-424 and the SF-424A. But then especially if you're using our template, or if you have your own, or you're kind of, you maybe have a bunch of different attachments, some with letters of confirmation or letters of support, or your budget or whatever. A lot of people don't know you can attach those to the SF-424. If you go in to fill out the SF-424, there is an attachment option and use that to do your attachments. I don't know if there's a limit on those, on the number of attachments, but I think I've gotten at least 15 different attachments successfully. So I think you should be okay to use that process. So, all right. So we've made it through the application. The agency has gotten your application. We've acknowledged it. Then we will review it for eligibility. So we're going to look to see if your application provides all the information that we asked for, and that if that information shows that the applicant organization and the project meet the requirements. It can take us a little while to get that done. We don't have a lot of staff working on this program, so it may take a month or two to do that. And we don't issue any eligibility determinations in writing until after we finish the application processing step. And the main reason for that is we have limited resources, but also when we go through the process, it's possible we might make a mistake, and we can figure that out before we've issued any letters, and we can correct it without causing any issues. So that's why we wait till the end. Now, if your application is eligible for funding, it will go to the review panel for scoring. The review panel takes a look at the information you provided, and it scores the applications based on the criteria that we published in the Federal Register. So I'm not quite sure what the timing on this part of the process will be, but probably May-ish. If we have a lot of applications, it could be later than that. But we definitely, as soon as we are finished with the eligibility process, we move on to the scoring process. So once we have all those applications scored, we rank the applications and we select the applications for funding in rank order until we use up the funding we have. And usually the selection occurs within a few weeks of when the review panel finishes scoring. So then after we have made our selections, we notify the recipients as well as the unsuccessful applicants. Unsuccessful applicants receive something called an adverse decision letter that identifies the reasons the application wasn't selected, and it provides information about steps that an applicant can take if they think we made a mistake, like requesting an administrative review or an appeal hearing. Okay, so if you are selected for funding, I'm going to give you just a brief overview of how that part of the process works. The first thing we do is we email something called a letter of conditions, and that goes to the contact information that you provided with your application. This letter lets applicants know how much funding they're approved for and identifies the information that needs to be provided before we can approve an award. So this information is usually things like forms, but it can also be requests to make modifications to your budget and work plan, to remove unallowable expenses or to clarify costs, and then to provide updated verification of matching funds and board member commitments if needed. Typically, applicants will get about 60 days to meet the conditions of the award. Once all the information requested by the letter of conditions has been provided, we will finalize a grant agreement and submit it for legal review. Once the legal review is complete, we send the agreement to the applicant, who is now becoming the recipient, to sign. Then the agency signs it, and at that time, we consider that the award is approved and the agreement has been executed. And once that has happened, you can begin work on your project. All right. I know that was a lot of complex information presented in a short amount of time. So I'm going to open up the webinar for questions. If you've already submitted a question through the Q&A box, I'm going to start with those, but you can still submit additional questions. We do plan to provide a summary of the questions and answers for the attendees after the webinar is over. And if there are questions that we can't get to today or we need additional time to research, we will also provide those questions and answers in the summary. I'm not quite sure how long it will take us to compile the information, but we'll definitely try and get it as soon as possible. And there will also be a recording of this webinar available. I think it probably will take at least 2 weeks for that to get done based on past years. But again, we will post a link to that on our program webpage that I showed you earlier. And we'll have a link to that program page at the end of this presentation, so you can have that. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the Q&A box, and I'm going to try and get through these. The one thing I will say is that if you have a super specific question that's very specific to your organization or your situation, I might defer that and talk to you about it later, but I'll try and get to as many as I can right after I get this quick drink of coffee. All right, so the first question here is, would a university applicant be able to use the value of existing salaries, equipment, and office space as qualifying matching funds for the grant? So, to a certain degree, no, probably not. So you won't be able to use things that you've already purchased. So but let's break this down. So you've got existing salaries, so that would be existing people on your staff. If those people are going to be working on the project, you can use their salaries going forward during the project period, so the period of performance. They'll incur costs for their salaries during that time. So the amount that you pay out for their salaries for the work that they do on the project during the period of performance can be used as match. Existing equipment and office space, no. Equipment is not an allowable cost for the program. Office space for university is probably going to come in through your F&A rate or your indirect cost rate. If it doesn't, then the value of that office space going forward could potentially be used as matching funds. I would definitely recommend checking with me before you submit your application, just to make sure we can iron out how that might look in the application to make sure it works. So that's that one. Okay, so the next one. This one says, is it correct that universities cannot use salaries and benefits as match? The answer to that is no, it's not correct. Universities can use salary and fringe benefits as matching funds as long as those salaries and benefits are incurred during the time period of the project and for the work that's being done on the project. So I hope that helps clarify that. Okay, so this one says the Federal Register requires a 30% match on 1 million. That's a 300,000 match, not 500,000. Please confirm. I'm not sure where you found the 30% number. It's actually 1/3, so it's 33.333 repeating. So you have to look when you're calculating your matching funds. You have to look at your full project cost, and your project cost is your grant award plus your match. So it's kind of a dynamic process here. So first you think about how much money do I need to do my project? And so if you say to yourself, I need $1.5 million to do my project, that's easy math. 1/3 of that is 500,000 and 1 million is 2/3 of that. So that works out for your match and your grant award. If you have another amount, I'm not going to be able to do the math for you in my head, but if you have another amount, let's say maybe, no, I'm not going to do it. I'll get it wrong. Anyway, figure out what your total budget is and take 1/3 of that, and that is your match. If you have any questions, please send me an email. We will do the math together and make sure we get it right. Okay. All right. Next one. To clarify, the center must meet the governance requirement. It is not an option for the applicant to meet the requirement and partner with an existing center to implement. So I'm not quite sure what's happening with this question, but there's a couple of different considerations here. One is that partnering with an existing center means that the existing center needs to be the one to be doing the project. So I think maybe you're asking if you could have a fiscal agent, maybe like apply and then basically funnel the money to an existing center. And I think that's probably complex enough that you might want to talk to me about it one-on-one. But it is the center that has to have the board of directors and meet the independence governance requirement and have the board of directors that has the 7 different representatives. So the applicant organization doesn't necessarily have to meet that requirement if they have a subsidiary. So like a university is not going to change their whole board of directors to apply. They're going to set up a center, which is a subsidiary of the university, and they're going to have a board of directors for that center. But what I think maybe you're asking is if it's the opposite. So the applicant has the board of directors, but then maybe contracts out the work to a center that doesn't meet the requirements. And I think then you probably would run into some problems, but I would definitely recommend talking with me one-on-one to kind of work through that if you have that situation. So we're going to go ahead and close that out. The next question is, does the state legislator need to be on an agricultural committee? The answer is no. They can be on any committee. They can have any experience. They just need to be a state legislator. And in fact, you may have more luck finding one that doesn't have a conflict of interest if they are not on the ag committee. So I just throw that out there. And that's just a statutory requirement. It's not put forward by the agency. All right, next question. Can the general agricultural organization include non-farmers? For example, an organization that also includes input suppliers, lenders, processors, in addition to farmers. So the general agricultural organization has a definition, and the mission, the primary mission of the organization must be to support agriculture. So if you are looking at organizations that aren't the Farm Bureau or something that's like super obviously general ag organization, I would suggest getting in touch with us and we can kind of work through it to see if it would work. Because that can definitely be something on a case by case, or not a case by case basis, but we're going to want to do an analysis to see if the mission of the organization works and if it fits the definition. So I probably can't answer it just on a hypothetical. We probably have to look at the actual organization. So if you have one of those, go ahead and get it. Does the center governance dictated by the grant need to carry forward beyond the grant period, or can that change? So the answer to that is no, the center governance does not need to carry forward beyond the grant period. Once your organization is outside the time period of performance for the award, you can do whatever you want to do. We only regulate your governance and other requirements during the actual period of performance for the grant award. All right, next question. can the organization supporting the establishment of an agricultural innovation center be the same organizations agreeing to serve on the board of directors? So I think that would be okay. We would be looking for conflicts of interest for sure, but simply supporting the center, I don't think would be considered a conflict of interest. But, you know, if you have any concerns or questions about the organizations, you can definitely get in touch with us and just run the scenario by us to see if there's a concern or something that might cause a problem. Okay. Next question. Can funds be used to buy databases that would provide market analysis assistance to farmers? That depends. It depends about the nature of your project and the nature of the type of assistance that you're providing. If you're just making an online database available to farmers, no. If the database is used by your organization to help farmers either develop or market a value-added agricultural product, then yes, that's probably fine. So it kind of depends on how you're going to use the database. One thing to remember is that this award isn't meant to be a hands-off kind of award for the center. We are expecting the centers to provide one-on-one quality technical assistance to producers. So it isn't just making resources available to producers, it's actually making sure that the businesses or the farmers that you're working with actually meet the definition of agricultural producer and that they are working toward a value-added agricultural product. Not just trying to make their production more efficient or, you know, maybe market something that isn't a value-added product. We have specific definitions for what it means to be an ag producer and what a value-added agricultural product is. And so I would encourage you to check out those definitions to make sure you know what that means and that you as a center are capable of making sure that who you work with meets those definitions. So I hope that helps. All right. Did I hear Gail say that you cannot provide services to those in the middle of the chain, such as distributors and processors, unless they are also farmers? I'm not sure if I quite said that, but it is true. You cannot provide services to distributors, processors, manufacturers, businesses that are buying commodities and then making a value-added product. None of those organizations are eligible to get assistance from the center. The center can only work with businesses or individuals that meet the definition of agricultural producer. And that definition can be found in 7 CFR, part 4284, subpart J. I think it's paragraph 0.902. But if you have any questions about that, you can talk to me about it. But essentially, an agricultural producer is someone who contributes to the day-to-day operations of the farm. So this is the person who owns or rents the land and is out there with a tractor, with a combine, feeding the cows, milking the cows, that sort of thing. That is the person we're trying to help. And we want to help that person take their raw commodity to a value-added agricultural product so that they can realize more of the consumer's dollar instead of just selling their raw commodity and then having processors and distributors taking the cut of that supply chain. So this is what the program is. All right. Can you explain the difference between R&D and product development listed? Yes, I will try my very best to do that. So currently there's a restriction in the program regulation that prevents us from doing research and development. And the definition of research and development has kind of evolved over time since the regulation was first published in 2004. And when it was first published, R&D meant something a little bit different than what it means now. And so we are trying to find a balance between recognizing that product development is a really important part of producers bringing value-added products to market, but without crossing the line into R&D. So you'll see in the allowable uses of funds that we have a description of the things that are included in product development. So if it's on that list, you can do it. Based on my understanding of what product development includes, the only thing that we really don't cover with product development is recipe development, because that definitely is crossing the line into R&D. So if you want to do product development and you have any questions about whether or not a particular activity fits or doesn't fit, definitely let me know and we can walk through your process. But also just check that allowable uses of funds section and you'll see a list of activities that are included in product development. All right. Next question. If a center provides services to non-farmers, would it be ineligible if it made sure grant funds were only used to provide services to farmers? So centers can have more than one business functionality. They can provide lots of different types of services, and I think many of our existing centers do. And so they will segment their operations so that the grant funds are only used for allowable costs. So the center can provide other types of services that aren't allowable for the AIC program, as long as the grant funds and the match are used to provide services to agricultural producers. So hopefully that answers that. All right, next. If a third-party cash matching organization is one of the organizations that we are assisting in the center, is that a conflict of interest? Yes, it probably is. You know, if that's the only way you can meet your match, we can take a look at it and see if there's any way to make it work. But typically, if an organization is being assisted and also providing match, that is going to be a conflict of interest. All right, next question. If part of the funds should be going to developing processes, how do we decouple this from process expenses? Okay, so processing means actually manufacturing a product. So you're paying for the equipment that is used to manufacture the product. It might be some kind of machinery that empties a product into a jar or a package. It will include the labor of people who need to operate the machines or put the product into packages, those kinds of things. When we're talking about process development, we're talking about analyzing how it works. So you're providing guidance to the producer about how they set up the process, which is different than paying for the process. I hope that distinction is clear, but if not, definitely feel free to follow up. All right, next question. Where can we find information about the projects awarded under this program in the previous 2 rounds? So you can send me an email, and I can also just tell everybody who those organizations are. They are the Eastern Shore Entrepreneurship Center in Maryland, the Franklin County CDC in Massachusetts, the State University of New York at Cobleskill, Purdue University, the University of Missouri, and the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute in Minnesota. So those are the 6 previous recipients we've had in the past couple years. If you want to know who was funded in 2003, I've got that list too. So you can send me an email. In terms of the projects, I get a lot of questions about this because I think that there is a perception that knowing what the other projects did will be useful in terms of developing your application. In reality, all of the centers are basically doing the same thing. They may be serving a slightly different market. So they may not be providing services to every single kind of agricultural producer out there who produces every single commodity available. They're probably going to have a certain limit there. And they may have a geographic limit in terms of the state or a region of the state. But when you look at the allowable costs and the use of funds for this program, those are the services. So we're really expecting you to have a service-based work plan. So you'll be providing, you don't have to provide every single service on the list. You should probably provide several, but whichever ones best fit your skill set and capabilities and your vision for your center. So there may be some uniqueness in terms of each center and how they exactly choose to do their outreach or provide their services. Like some may use a hybrid of virtual and in-person services. Some may use more of a group setting for like a cohort. And so they might select several producers to kind of go through an entire process all at once, or they might piecemeal their services based on what producers need. There's a fairly limited scope in the way that projects work. So they're all basically the same thing. But if you have any questions, you know, some of our centers are already up and running and they have websites and you can check them out. Others are still in the process of getting started, so they don't have a web presence yet. But you can always check in with me if you feel like you need more information. Okay, next question. Can the applying organization provide the 2 personnel with 3 years of experience from the third-party cash matching organization? I think the answer to your question is yes, if I understand it correctly. So if I think what I'm seeing here is you have a third party that's providing match in the form of providing personnel, maybe 2 key personnel to the project, and they're paying their salaries as part of the match. That would be okay. So if it's something other than that, I've misunderstood the question, let me know, and I can come back to that with you. Okay, next question. With regard to funding restrictions, are processing expenses specific to equipment? Can funds be used to offset expenses for value-added processing, specifically commercial kitchen space rental, considering a formal partnership with commercial kitchen space and or co-packer? So processing expenses are not specific to equipment. They would also include using a commercial kitchen or renting space for a commercial kitchen or paying for someone to put the product in a package. Any processing related expense is not allowable. So that said, you can absolutely partner with a commercial kitchen or co-packer in terms of taking your producer through as much of the process as you can to identify that value-added product that they want to produce, helping them figure out how they're going to market it, helping them figure out what processes make sense, helping them select packaging, helping them do consumer taste tests, and then saying, okay, producer, now you can go and work with my commercial kitchen partner. And then that producer needs to have a relationship with that commercial kitchen in terms of how payment will be handled and how the process will go from there. But you can have a partnership. You just can't use grant or matching funds to pay for it. So I hope that helps clarify. Next question. Can we see previously funded awards from prior projects? I think I answered that one already. But if you feel like you need more information, definitely get in touch. But we don't actually release work plans and budgets and applications from previously funded projects. All right, next question. Can the board of directors fire someone who is a university employee? For example, can the board of a university administered center fire a professor? That's a great question, and it's one that we've, not that we've had happen, but we've talked about it hypothetically in the past. So no, they can't, the board of directors for a center cannot fire a professor from the university. They can fire the professor from the center. So what that means is the professor no longer works for the center and goes back to the university and whatever role that the university wants. And we might not think about it so much as hiring, as the person is no longer needed and goes back to their old job or a different job that the university needs them to do. So the board of directors only governs the center, does not govern the university. So I hope that distinction is clear. If not, get in touch, let me know. All right. What are the page limits for each section? Is this in the Federal Register notice? It is a little hard to find. Okay, there are some page limits. Let me see how we're doing on time here. All right, we're good. Let me see if I can go to the Federal Register notice for you. So we do have some page limits and things like that. So to start with your executive summary, a summary of the proposal not to exceed 1 page. So if there's a page limit for something, it should be with that section. The scoring criteria will also have a page limit, and you'll see that here under paragraph 7, where you've got a maximum of 3 pages. I think we've also got this information in the template. The one exception to this page limit is the work plan. There is a scoring criteria on work plan and budget. And so that scoring criteria would technically limit you. However, the work plan and budget are required elements of the application. So that page limit is waived. And so I apologize for the confusion about that. We're working with a regulation from 2004 and a more modern program right now. And so sometimes we try to do the best we can to modernize the program and streamline and get the information we need and still comply with the regulation. So that would be the one exception to that. I don't think that there are any other page limits for these items. So just remember your executive summary is 1 page and your scoring criteria are 3 pages with the exception of the work plan budget, and you should be okay. All right, I'll just hold here in case I need to go back to this document. All right. If you are an organization that is less than 1 million, you don't need a full formal audit. Will this limit us from participating? So the audit that we're talking about is not necessarily the kind of audit that you think about with respect to the OMB audit requirements. This is an audit of your organization that is done by a certified public accountant. So you'll have financial statements like income statements and balance sheet and that sort of thing. It doesn't necessarily have to meet the full requirements of a GAGAS audit or something like that. So as long as you have an audit that was conducted by an accountant who's certified to do audits, you should be fine. Okay. Next question. Can the board members be paid for their role on the board of the center? Yes, they can if you have written procedures that allow for that payment. Typically what I see is that board members will get an honoraria for their participation, and then they will have their travel costs reimbursed. So if that's what you want to do with your board members, you should make sure you have written procedures that outline how that process works. If you have a parent organization, usually adopting the parent organization's travel policy will get you in a good place. And then just specify how the board members are to be paid. It should be reasonable. If it looks unreasonable, then that will not be allowable. But as long as it's reasonable and it's written in your procedures, it is allowable. Okay, next question. Asking if there's a list or description of previous grant recipients. I think I've covered that, so we're good there. Next question. For the board of directors, what qualifies someone as a representative of the different required organization? Can they be staff, producer members, contractors, etc.? So part of that is based on the organization itself and who they will authorize to represent them. Typically, we see an officer of the organization. It's often a president or vice president, sometimes a secretary or treasurer. Very occasionally, we will see a producer member. I have never seen a contractor representative though, and I think that might be a little dicey. So I would encourage you probably to stick more to an officer of the organization or producer member. And so the thing is that, as with this would go for either the officer or the producer member, they need to continue to be employed by the organization or continue to be a member in the organization and continue to be authorized by the organization. So one of the things that if you get an award, we will ask you to provide a written letter from the organization itself, verifying that the person that has been selected is approved to represent that organization on the center's board and that there's not a conflict of interest with the organization for that person's representation. So just be aware of that. Okay. Next question. Is it acceptable to attach documents in zip format? I do not know the answer to that question. The grants.gov attachment requirements will apply. So that's probably best asked of the grants.gov system, or I think there is a help document that walks you through. So I would definitely check that out because I think things have probably changed over the years. So I'm not certain. It used to be that zip files would come through okay, but I don't know if they still do. So you should probably check with grants.gov. Okay, next question. Regarding the letters of support from the ag community, can these letters be from the same organizations that are represented on the board? So they might be. I think we have seen that a little bit. Just remember to make sure that the organization is clear about what its support is and you know what. So just submitting a letter saying we're providing a board member would probably not be an appropriate letter of support. The letter of support should be written in support of your project and carry the information that we're requesting, but it can be a duplicate organization that's also providing a board member. Okay. Next question. Does the center have to be statewide or can it be for a region of the state? The answer to that is the center does not have to provide services for an entire state. It can provide services to part of a state. The one thing to be aware of, though, is that when you get your board of directors together, they probably will have an incentive to want to work in the entire state because most of these organizations are going to be, well, not most, all of them are representing the state essentially. So if for some reason your state is very big and you can't fathom providing services for the entire state, you know, that's not an eligibility thing. That's going to come down to more with your board of directors and how they want to structure the project. So I think when you're looking for representatives for your board of directors, to make sure you're clear about the scope of the project. Okay. Next one. Can the Agricultural Innovation Center focus on supporting agricultural entities outside of state boundaries? Yes. Again, this is not an eligibility thing. You can work in more than one state. We do have an existing center that does do that. The thing to remember is that your board of directors is going to be focused on your state. So make sure that you're clear about the scope of the project when you are looking at getting your representatives for the board of directors. Let's see. Are there examples of governance structures for the board of directors? I don't really have any. Usually what we look at when we get applications in is that you have addressed in narrative form the things that I went through, which has to do with, how personnel decisions are made, how policies and procedures are set, who approves the budget. So if you have a narrative that describes those things and indicates clearly that the board of directors is responsible for them, that's generally sufficient for us. Sometimes people will put in little flow charts that kind of show decision-making processes. That probably isn't necessary for us. We're just really looking for a narrative description. And so, when your board of directors meets, if you're forming it specifically for the award, they wouldn't meet until probably after you got the award. Then one of the first orders of their business would be to approve your budget and approve staffing and approve policies and procedures. And if you have a parent organization, you can flow those through if it makes sense to do that, or you can make minor changes if that makes sense to do that. And you'll set how often the board meets and items of business and things like that. But we don't need a complicated diagram. And really a lot of that is up to your individual board. Okay, next question. What are the stipulations around regranting some of the funds to farmers? Is it $50,000 total or $50,000 max per farmer? Okay, so this question has to do with a mini grant option that you can use. So it's up to $5,000 per agricultural producer with a total of $50,000. So if you give $5,000, or not give, but award $5,000 to each agricultural producer, you can make a maximum of 10 awards. You may also choose to make less than $5,000 awards, in which case you could obviously make more than 10 awards. So however many awards adds up to $50,000. So hopefully that made sense. If not, let me know. All right, next. Can you use capital infrastructure development as matching funds as long as it happens after the grant period? So no, I don't, unless I'm misunderstanding what capital infrastructure development means, but you can't use anything as match that you couldn't use for the grant. So the matching funds and the grant funds are subject to the same use of funds restrictions. And then as long as it happens after the grant period, I'm not sure anything that happens after the grant period is over is not something that we concern ourselves with as the federal government. During the grant period is when we're paying attention. So I'm not sure if you meant maybe after the period of performance starts, but generally capital infrastructure development would not be an allowable expense. It would be the services that are provided. So you're typically going to see as match, either cash match from the organization to pay for salaries. You might see third-party cash match to pay for salaries. Most of the expenses that you're going to incur are going to be salaries and fringe benefits. And then you'll have probably a small budget for office supply type things. You may have a budget for travel, and you may have a contractual budget, but again, that is going to be for probably consultants to help fill gaps that your staff doesn't have the capability for providing services. So you're not going to see equipment and things like that in the budget. All right. I saw that R&D expenses are not allowable, but applied R&D is allowed. Do you have any examples of what this might look like? I'm not quite sure where you saw that, but definitely in our Federal Register notice, we try to be super clear about what you can do. And so I would stick to those categories for uses of funds. So we've kind of outlined, providing organizational assistance, business development assistance, those kinds of things. R&D probably is really only a factor when you're getting into product development. And we've been pretty clear, I think, about what components of product development are allowable versus which ones are not, which is basically recipe development. So I would really stick to that rather than trying to imagine something. And I think maybe what you saw is applied research, not applied R&D. Anyway, stick to what we've published in the Federal Register as the allowable uses of funds when you're setting up your projects, and you'll be pretty safe there. Okay. Next question. Can you please cover matching funds of third parties in detail? Okay, I'm not sure. So matching funds from third parties can either be in kind or cash. I'm not sure, to be honest, that I've seen in kind match come in. But so cash match from third party is going to be, we're giving you cash. You can use it for your project and during this time period and for these reasons, and those reasons should be something like salaries and fringe benefits to pay for your staff, or it might be to buy office supplies. It might be to pay a consultant, that kind of thing, maybe used for travel. If it's in kind, this is likely, like, again, I don't know that I've seen it, but I can imagine that it would be like a consultant who wants to help you with your project, and maybe they're going to donate some of their time for your project. So they are going to have a standard hourly rate. Maybe they charge $100 an hour, and they say, I will donate, 100 hours during the next 3 years to consult on projects for you. And so their in-kind match is going to be whatever that $100 an hour times however many hours that they donate. And they're going to have to put that in a letter that says, this is my standard hourly rate. This is how many hours I'm donating. This is what I'm going to do with my hours. And then this is the time period that I'm going to do it. So I hope that makes sense. If not, of course, get in touch and provide the example of what you're looking to find out more about. Next question. Approximately how many grants, how much funding do you expect to be available this application cycle? Will these grants also be available for 2024 or to be determined? Thank you. So we have about $8 million and we have a maximum grant size of $1 million. So that means we can fund up to, 8 awards at that maximum amount. If we have awards that we fund at less than the maximum amount, we could probably fund more than 8. The other thing to realize, though, is that in the past, this program has been a bit challenging for people to meet the eligibility requirements for. So we haven't always maxed out our total available funding. So in terms of whether the grants will be available in 2024, that depends a lot on Congress. We have authorization for the program, and if Congress gives us an appropriation, we will run the program. So I'm sorry I can't be more specific, but we kind of go on a year-to-year basis. All right, next question. So to confirm, matching does not need to be by category. So I think what you mean is in your budget, do you need to show matching funds by some designated categories like salaries, fringe benefits, travel? The answer to that is yes, you do. Your matching funds letters can be more general. They don't have to necessarily give the budget categories, but when you're filling out your budget justification, you will find in there that there are some sections that will ask you to section things out. I think maybe I should check before I finish answering your question. Let me pull up the template. If I don't. All right. Let's see. We're going to go back to our budget justification. My apologies for the rapid scrolling here. All right. Yep. Here we go. So our budget justification section is fairly detailed, and I think you'll find this consistent with the way more and more federal agencies are going. I think AMS is asking for expenses this way. So you'll see that you'll need to provide the award amount and the matching funds amount by your general categories, and then we'll ask for breakdown in the narrative here. Now, I will say, I know that sometimes it's hard, especially for a 3-year project, to know exactly how every penny is going to be spent. You're giving us your best estimate of how these funds will be spent. If you receive an award, you will have a certain amount of flexibility in terms of moving money among your budget categories. So let's say you thought you were going to have people on staff when you applied, and as you get into your project, you realize you're not going to be able to attract a full-time person like you thought you would, and you're going to need to contract out the work. So you can move money between the salaries and fringe benefits line items to the contracting item in order to make that happen. So, you know, depending on, especially universities often like to have super detailed budgets, whereas other organizations are a little bit less detailed, but you should give your best guess for these things. So your verification of matching funds letters doesn't have to be this specific, but your actual budget justification does. So I hope that helps answer that question. Okay. Next question. How broadly do you define value-added ag? Would a project that seeks to help producers grow crops using specific practices that meet consumer needs, like low carbon, organic, non-GMO, be considered value-added if the consumer or processor returns back to the producer a higher value for the crop produced in this way? So, value-added agricultural product is actually a definition that comes from our value-added producer grant program. And that definition is fairly complex. And so growing crops using specific practices may or may not meet that definition. Organic should definitely meet that definition. When it comes to a couple of those other examples, I think we might need to talk specifically about that. But then the other thing I want you to remember is that the processor, so the way that the processor is involved may dictate whether it really meets the requirement. So if the producer's just selling the commodity, then it may not be a value-added agricultural product, except of course if we talk about organic, and that may be. Whether the processor returns the value back is probably not as much a consideration as some other things. So if you're looking at working with producers who are not engaged in developing or marketing sort of what we might think of as standard value-added products, where the value added is super clear and more conventional, then you should definitely talk to me and we can kind of work through it, because I'm going to always defer back to our value-added producer grant program to make sure we're being consistent in the way that we treat what value-added means. So, all right, let's go on to our next question. Is it appropriate for state agencies to apply to re-grant this funding through a competitive request for proposals process? For example, the state agency will provide match and issue an RFP for X number of regional AICs. No, that isn't the intent of this program. So state agencies are eligible to apply. A state Department of Agriculture can absolutely apply, but they need to be planning to run the center through that agency. The funds cannot go back out for regional AICs. I think probably if you're interested in that kind of a model, AMS might have a better program for you. But this one is definitely meant to fund the centers directly. Okay, next question. How would a commercial entity applicant fulfill the audit requirements if there were no audits the organization was previously required to perform? So please forgive me, you guys, my dog is in the background being very hungry. So anyway, if you do not have an audit, you're not eligible to apply. That's kind of the line there. So new organizations that are super brand new that haven't even had a full year of operation, and so they don't have an audit, are not going to be eligible. You're going to have that audit. And as I mentioned before, the audit doesn't necessarily have to be this, GAGAS type audit. It can just be one that's conducted by a CPA and in accordance with general accounting procedures. So just be aware of that. Okay, next question. Are there case studies of previous year AIC grantees to review? No, there are not. We have existing recipients who are in the process of wrapping up their projects, or some that still have a little bit more to go. We have some new ones from our last round of funding who are just getting started, but we don't have any case studies yet. Next question. Could you please provide additional explanation or interpretation of the no duplication of current services requirement? We need to show a track record of similar services. Can extending and expanding on our current services be part of the grant project, or does everything have to be brand new? Sure. So no duplication of current services is mostly our way of saying you can't charge our award for services that you're already providing and maybe getting funded through another award. So you're going to be, you can provide your same services, but they need to be, you might be providing your same services to new customers, or you might be providing some new services to existing customers. But the thing that you can't do is, let's say, do a feasibility study for corporation ABC. And let's say you did that for them already, and then you get an award from us and want to charge that same feasibility study to our award. So this requirement is basically just to say, be mindful of who you're providing your services to, and make sure that you're not charging the award for something that is paid for either with another award or that you've previously done. I hope that makes sense, but if not, let me know. Next question. Regarding policies and procurement of independent governance. Centers established at a university typically follow central overarching university policies and procedures, especially those regarding procurement. How have other universities navigated this requirement in the past? So my understanding of what our existing university recipients are doing is that they are flowing their university procedures and policies through to the center. So the board of directors will formally adopt the university policies and procedures to the extent that it makes sense to do so. Sometimes there might be a reason that a university does something and it doesn't make sense to flow that through to the center. Maybe like a paperwork requirement or some other, time period requirement or something like that. But in general, the universities are just flowing the policies and procedures through. So I hope that answers your question. All right, next question. Can you provide your contact information so that we may communicate specific questions? Absolutely. I'm going to have it on the slide at the end of the session, but I'm typing it in here right now. My contact information is Gail, Gail, Tuner, THUNER, @USDA.gov. All right, next question. Is there a preferable or desirable geographic scale that the center serves, such as statewide or multiple counties? There's not necessarily a preferable one from the agency's perspective, but clearly based on the way the program has been set up, there was an intent for centers to provide services within a state. So multi-state projects are certainly allowable, but you have to remember that the state that the center is located in is going to dictate who your board of directors is going to be. So that may limit your options for going outside the state. And in terms of focusing on, say, 3 to 5 counties or something like that, again, your board of directors is going to have some influence over that, because if you've got board of directors members representing your entire state, but then you say, well, we're only going to work in these 3 counties in the southwest corner, it may be hard to get the support you need to do that. So it's just being mindful of what the intent of the program is, which is to have a center serving the state. And so I think as close as you can get to that model, the more competitive your project will be and the easier it will be for you to get support. But that is not a requirement. All right, next question. Can the services of an agriculture innovation center be utilized to work with potential customers to help establish market standards? For example, quality standards, packaging specifications. The intention is that these standards would be used to help farmers develop their value-added products. So I get the sense from this question that the customers here would not necessarily be the agricultural producers. And if that's the case, then no. The center can only work with agricultural producers. Now, if you have a group of producers that you're working with who want to market the same or similar product, one of the things you might do is a consumer survey to find out, are there consumer preferences that the producers are going to want to meet in order to market their product. So you can look at consumer preferences as part of helping agricultural producers, but the drive behind why you are serving the consumers is because you have the producer. You're not serving the consumers and then going back to the producers and saying, hey guys, we did this consumer survey and it looks like X, Y, and Z is what consumers prefer. So if you guys want to do that, we can help. All of your work needs to be producer driven, not consumer driven. I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, let me know. All right, next question. If you are a university with a nonprofit foundation, can you use an already existing board of directors with the added agricultural representative? Yes, you can. If you have additional board members that go beyond the 7 that we require, that's fine. You just must have the board that includes those 7, and then that fulfills your requirement. Okay, next question. If there is already a similar center in or close to your region, are you still eligible? Yes, you are still eligible. However, you may want to look at a partnership or collaboration instead, because the dollars are fairly limited, but there is no restriction. All right, next question. Are the items that are desired to be seen in a letter of support outlined somewhere? Yes. Let us go to the Federal Register. Okay. We are going to look in our application requirements section. Give me a minute. I'm trying not to scroll super fast. All right. Let's see. I'm assuming you're talking about the support of the agricultural community. So if you look down here, item 17 here, it says you must include 3 letters of support. Evidence of support includes contributions of cash or in-kind match, referring clients, intent to collaborate. We consider the support to be relevant if the organization is based in the state or region, et cetera, et cetera. It goes on to the page. And then we've got some cautions there that, to note that support from organizations that are not agricultural in nature, such as local chambers of commerce, are not relevant. And then you can go back to section C 1A5 to read a little bit more about it if you want. So those are the 2 places that you're going to find information about that requirement. Next question. There is a requirement for the majority ag organization to be supportive. But what if they are not supportive or don't represent all of the producers as the target? There is a bias within some organizations and their participation on the board might hinder rather than help the center. So I'm sorry if that's your situation. Certainly that is going to be a challenge for that type of center. The statute for the program is super specific about which organizations need to be on the board. And so if the organization that meets that requirement is not supportive of your project and they don't want to contribute to your board of directors, then you will not be able to be eligible to apply. So that's kind of a challenge to overcome. I will say that one of our previously funded centers admitted to having some concerns about the distribution of members on the board of directors because they weren't people who were normally working together. And in fact, the center said that the collaboration among those people ended up being very positive, and they ended up having conversations that would have never been had without that kind of commitment to the board. So beyond that, all I can say is if you want to do the project, it's important to bring your stakeholders together. And if you have challenges like this, to do the best you can. But in the end, if you cannot get the required representation, you won't be eligible for the program. All right, next question. Can grant money go to consultants in order to fulfill the personnel requirements? Yes, so you can use grant and matching funds to pay for consultants who are experts in their field and who will help provide the services that the center wants to provide. That money would go under the contract category in the budget. All right, we got 3 questions left, you guys. I think we're going to make our 3 o'clock deadline. Next question. Can matching funds be loans that are later paid by the center? I don't think we have any allowance for that. I think maybe, are you thinking like a line of credit or something like that? Maybe, maybe. I would say check in with me if that's your planned match, and we can look at it and see how it would work. We might be able to consider it an applicant cash match, depending on exactly how the funding works. But I would say another source of funds might be preferred. But if that's the only way you can get your match, let me know and we can take a look at it. All right. Next question. Would matching funds provided by a university applicant to pay for salaries and benefits be considered cash or in-kind matching funds? So that's going to be cash. It's the university is paying salaries for their professors or other staff to work on the award, so they are providing cash. Okay, guys, final question. I can't believe you've all hung in with me. What are the common errors that cause an increased number of application and eligibility? So a lot of it is simply not providing the information that we asked for, or kind of saying we meet this requirement, but not explaining how. So like for an example might be for independent governance, an applicant says, we have a board of directors with independent governance, and that's it. Without saying, you know, our board of directors is going to approve hiring and firing, they're going to set our policies, they're going to approve our budget, that sort of thing. So that's a common thing. Getting the matching funds wrong is another one. We talked about before how it's 1/3 of the total project cost, not 1/3 of the amount you are requesting for the grant award. That's a common mistake. Make sure your match is correct. Not providing your applicant eligibility information, not providing your audit, not answering the scoring criteria, not providing any information for that. Or quite honestly, just giving us a project that doesn't fit. So it might be an awesome project, and we've had applications come in where clearly applicants are putting in an incredible amount of work, but the project doesn't fit the program. Our program is actually pretty limited in what we can fund, and so it's really important to take a look at the allowable uses of funds and I think it's like 8 different services that we will allow, and to make sure that you are providing those services and that you're providing them to agricultural producers. So that would be what I would say. All right. Awesome. I'm not seeing any more questions in my Q&A window. Last call, if anybody has questions. I'm going to go back to my presentation here so that we can show the contact information. Website is here, and contact information for me, for Honey, and then we have a general AIC box, mailbox that's shared. So if I'm out or Honey's out, people can still see the emails there. So you can use any one of those. Oh, we had one last question. Can indirect costs that are foregone be used as match? I think that we have said no on that. I think we've just got a minute here. Let me see if I can pull that up in Federal Register. I got a whole bunch of stuff on my screen here, so just give me 1 second and see if we've addressed it in the Federal Register. Here we go, cost sharing. So I don't see that we have addressed it here. I would say that if you need to do that, check in with me, and I will see if I can get a policy decision on that, because most of our programs do not allow it. So, and I think the intention is for this one not to, but I don't see that we specifically. Oh, no, I take it back. I see it now. Sorry, my eyes are blind. Applicants cannot propose to use unrecovered indirect costs as matching funds. So unrecovered indirect costs would be the same as foregone indirect costs. So I apologize. It took me a minute to figure it out. My old eyes are sad. But thank you so much for asking the question. Okay. So I think we're wrapping it up, you guys. Thank you so much for your attendance, and we will get our recording and Q&A document out as soon as we can. Feel free to contact me with follow-up questions if you have them, and have a great afternoon, and we can wrap things up. So thank you so much.